Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, back to the Elder Scrolls 6 discussion series. My name's Camel, and today we're going to dabble in the topic of High Rock, but more importantly how it will fare as the setting for the Elder Scrolls 6. As it is one of the most beautiful and epic fantasy settings in Tamriel, we'll be touching on its geography, its flora, fauna, ancient civilizations, modern cultures, its races and politics, and the current state of things in the classic province of High Rock. I, of course, implore you to watch the whole video as I've put over 2 weeks into this, and for good reason. High Rock is a crazy place. I've also made timestamps for the topics covered in the video. Be sure to use them if you wish to browse the video in that fashion. They can be found in the description, along with my social medias, and also links to my other Elder Scrolls 6 discussion videos, which you should check out because they're a lot of fun, but not before watching this video. Because by the end of it, High Rock will likely become your most desired location for the Elder Scrolls 6, as it is the most classical European fantasy setting, with the entire province steeped in magic and high fantasy flavors. And yes, in the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, the southernmost regions of High Rock were in the game. However, I'm sure like many of you, I don't feel like this is a valid reason to bypass High Rock as an option for the setting of a modern day Elder Scrolls game. As one, we didn't see most of the province anyway, and secondly, I truly don't feel like this, while it may be close to many of our hearts, is a worthy representation of High Rock. I mean, if people struggle with playing Oblivion or Morrowind for their graphics, people's desires to explore High Rock will most certainly not be sated by the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall. So is High Rock a realistic option for the Elder Scrolls 6? I think it is, yeah. And do we, the consumer, want to see it in full flight as a modern day game setting? Well, at least I do. And I think you do too. And if you don't, watch this. So what is High Rock? Well, High Rock is the northwesternmost region of Tamriel. It borders Hammerfell to the southeast, the home of the Redguards, and Skyrim to the east, home of the Nords. High Rock is the homeland of the Man Murray, the Bretons, along with being host to the seat of Orsinium, the city of the Orzammar, the Orcs. High Rock is also only one of 2 provinces on Tamriel that don't border with Cyrodiil, the other being the Somerset Isles. Firstly, let's touch on the geography of High Rock, the environment, the setting that we could expect to be traveling and exploring through. Luckily, all of High Rock is available to play through in the Elder Scrolls Online, so we'll be getting a very good sense of what High Rock is like geographically. Well, this ancient province of Tamriel boasts a wide array of different landscapes and terrains, possibly more so than any other province, but that is up for debate. Its landscape is diverse, ranging from green, peaceful forests through to desolate, spired badlands, all the way through to treacherous, snowy mountains. With its fertile soil and weather that is often cloudy yet relatively dry, High Rock has attracted many cultures throughout history, who we'll talk about later on. But for now, let's get back to the geography. I bet it's the first time in your life you've been excited about geography. Anyway, we'll start at the bottom and move up north. So, Glenumbra. It's the westernmost region of High Rock, encompassing most of the large peninsula separating the Iliac Bay from the Eltharic Ocean. The region is home to the city-state of Camlorn, Daggerfall, the very city the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall was named after, and the great cemetery of Cath Bydrod. The region is covered in a dense green forest with ruins enveloped in layers of vines. These rich and tranquil forests are accompanied by babbling brooks, rolling green hills, and the bones of ancient and mystical roots. There is also a sizable swamp around the area of Hagfen, appropriately named, entailing dangerous journeys for travellers with its unwelcoming grey biome. Much of Glenumbra is also bordered by the ocean, which is met by a healthy variation of sandy shores and sheer cliffs. The mixture of highlands, coastline, cool forests, and overcast swamps leaves Glenumbra with a unique and rather homely yet moderate European fantasy feel. Heading north, we have a region known as Riven Spire. Ooh, it contains the city-states of Shornhelm and Northpoint, and the infamous Crypt of Hearts. It also contained the Doomcrag, a massive alien tower before it was destroyed. The region's landscape is rather gloomy and consists of dry badlands with jagged rock formations, flinty crags, wind-swept moors and narrow canyons, and despite it often being overcast and misty, Rivenspire remains strangely dry and desolate. Although, for those that are willing to traverse such grim lands, ancient and powerful secrets are hidden beneath the tortured stone bones that make up this region of High Rock. Excluding its regional borders to the south, like Glenumbra, much of Rivenspire is bordered by ocean. ocean, making way for harsh coastal winds that blow across its jagged rock formations, puncturing the rather bleak lowlands. And while Rivenspire is treacherous and unwelcoming, that is equally its charm. Moving to the southeast, we have Stormhaven, an appropriately named region, probably High Rock's most fertile land, with an almost tropically tempered climate accompanied by frequent afternoon storms. The region consists of sparsely forested rolling green hills with soft streams, gentle spring breezes, and peaceful waterfalls brushing across the land. Stormhaven is the center of Breton commerce in both High Rock and the Iliac Bay, as Stormhaven borders all of the other regions in High Rock, rendering it essentially the center of the province, much like Whiterun is to Skyrim. To the north, it is bordered by high mountains, and to the south, it is bordered by the Iliac Bay, across which one can even see Hammerfell. Heading east once more, we will hit a region known as Bangkorai. Now, High Rock only lays claim to the northern half of Bangkorai, as Hammerfell lays claim to the southern half, as the region is divided by the fortified walls of Bangkorai Pass. So we could only expect to spend time in the northern section of Bangkorai, but if we want to get greedy, we might be able to expect to explore this southern section of Bangkorai as well. But for now, let's limit our discussion to the northern region. So North Bangkorai makes up the southeastern reaches of High Rock. It is a heavily forested area with rocky hills, hot and dry weather, but occasionally smashed by heavy rain, resulting in a dry yet green landscape. With healthy water flows, high pendulous rock formations, cliffs, healthy greens, and plenty of creatures inhabiting it. In fact, the Glenumbra Witch Coven also have heavy roots in the weird here, in North Bangkorai. And finally, for the main regions of High Rock, heading north we have a region called Wrothgar, which traditionally is known as the home of the Orzma, the Orcs, warriors that live in isolated tribes across the Jurassic Mountains. Wrothgar has cool green pine forests to the south, harsh rocky tundra in the middle, and snow-showered frost pines to the north. Dense, fog-laden, ice-encrusted stones, rivers, and ancient ruins can be found in the mysterious reaches of Wrothgar. It has many ruins that date back to the Dwemer, the Aeliad, and the ancient Nords, and the ancient Orcs. The Orc city Orsinium has traditionally existed in Wrothgar. Unfortunately, Orsinium has always been sieged by the Bretons or the Red Guards, or a combination of the two. Wrothgar will undoubtedly bring back fond memories for Skyrim players, as it does border the Jurassic Mountains, just as the Reach and Hafinga do in Skyrim. Wrothgar, the Reach and Hafinga are simply on opposite sides of the same mountain range, which explains why we see orcs in the northwestern regions of Skyrim, and why we see signs of Nordic cultures in the northeastern regions of High Rock. Well, a little bit anyway. High Rock also lays claim to several small islands. The two most notable are Betony, which lies at the mouth of Iliac Bay, and the second, and let's be honest, the more important island, is the Isle of Balfiera. The reason this isle is so important is because it is home to the oldest structure on all of Tamriel. As far as we know, on all of Nirn, namely the Adamantine Tower. We'll talk more in depth on that later on. So High Rock is a geographical anomaly, which would be an amazing setting for the Elder Scrolls 6. I mean, green magical forests, spired deadlands, Mediterranean bays, frozen mountains, desert-like rocky glades, a number of small islands, and one hell of a lot of coastline. That sounds like a really good Elder Scrolls setting to me. Now we have a feel for the land of High Rock, let's discuss the creatures that dwell within it. Then we'll touch on the races and the cultures, but for now, the fauna. The animals, the beasts, the mystical entities and creatures that inhabit High Rock are quite a colourful bunch. While we have many familiar faces, we also have many new additions to our bestiaries. So again, we can expect to see classics like bears, wolves, deer, mud crab, blah blah blah. You get the idea with the stock standard animals. But let's focus on the new or unique finds that we can expect to run across in High Rock, starting with the most important of all, camels. Although rare, they can actually be found having been brought across from Hammerfell. Centaurs, nomadic creatures but semi-intellectual, they can be found commonly throughout High Rock. Sabretooth Tigers, not to be confused with the saber cats from Skyrim, are a rare sight in High Rock, although, once again, sometimes brought across from Hammerfell and are trained as pets, and they're actually symbols of nobility within High Rock. There are things called Dragonlings, although actually unrelated to dragons, they can still breathe fire and prove to be a challenge for adventurers. Harpies, they lay claim to the rocky cliffs where they build their nests. Harpies are fierce, carnivorous, feminine humanoid creatures with wings wings of a bird. They have a reputation as furious feathered femme fatales who kidnap and mate with human males, which they then kill. There are hags, not to be confused with hag ravens. Hags roam the fens, swamps and forests, dealing with ancient and dark nature-based magics within High Rock. There are Spriggans, which mix with the witch covens and hags of High Rock, forming forbidden and forgotten pacts with the forests. This leads to things like lurchers. They are abominations usually created through dark nature magic by corrupting a Spriggan, not uncommon with all the hags and witch covens. Even giants can be found roaming the lowlands of Wrothgar, and of course mammoths accompany these Wrothgarian giants just like in Skyrim. Frost giants have also been rumoured to exist in the northern mountains of Wrothgar, not surprising as that is where the Forgotten Vale lies. But wouldn't that be awesome? There are ogres, these large and powerful beasts with cannibalistic tendencies found in remote areas. We have giant bats, which hang themselves in the crags of Riven Spire, scaring the life out of those who would dare venture into such treacherous parts. There are giant scorpions who roam the dried mires of Riven Spire, being able to paralyze passers-by with a single sting. There are giant snakes that lurk in shallow waters and swamps waiting for their prey, waiting for you. There are Echateres, these tusked creatures with pointed hooves and large antlers. They are mainly found in Wrothgar, but they actually serve the Orzammar as livestock and beasts of burden, like cows and horses do to the other races. There are Nereids. These are mer-like feminine water creatures that can often be heard singing, but don't be fooled, as they are essentially sirens, except these ones can traverse land, although often found near water. There are nymphs. They are rare and mysterious beings with beautiful female traits, but again, don't be fooled, as they can lure you in with their assets and then leech off of your life with their ancient nature magics. Werewolves, they plague the lands. Hearing ungodly howls during the night is uncommon but not to be unexpected in High Rock. If you like werewolves, get excited because there are werebears as well. They are sometimes seen roaming the rocks of the Reach. Again, get pretty pumped if you're into were stuff because we have wereboars. They are a much rarer form of lycanthropy, but unique to High Rock. So High Rock's the only place we'll ever see wereboars. And, dare I mention them, were-sharks. These mythical entities have been rumoured to haunt the Iliac Bay. An ultra-rare form of lycanthropy, or just a wives' tale to scare the children? Well, there's one way to find out, Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock. Not quite as scary, but there are Will-o-the-Wisp. These are magical creatures seen flickering ephemerally in the swamps, tormenting and often luring folk into the marshes at night. Not a good move. There are also many forms of undead that plague the land, as the realm of High Rock has many huge burial mounds and cemeteries. From this, necromancers breed and create all kinds of abominations. Things like skeletons, ghosts, spectres, lichers, blood fiends, wraiths, mummies, zombies, and everyone's favourites, vampires. So from this, I know that's a really long list, but it's pretty cool. It lists a lot of new beasts and entities that we'll get to encounter. Again, that's just some of the new and unfamiliar creatures of High Rock. We'll have all the Daedra and all the familiar animals and whatever else Bethesda decides to throw in. So now we have a very good feel for the geography and a very good feel for the scent of the beasts that inhabit the very lands we spoke about. Let's talk about the races and which cultures have existed in High Rock, and of course which of those are there now. So let's go back to the beginning. Before even the Dwemer, before even any other structure on Tamriel or possibly even Nirn, the Adamantine Tower, now known as the Dyreni Tower, also known as the Adamantia, or the Tower. This structure is believed to be the oldest building on all of Tamriel, if not the entirety of Nirn. When it was built, no one really knows who built it. No one truly knows, although it is strongly believed to have been built by the Aedra themselves. The Aedra, of course, are the divines, the gods. It is commonly accepted that the Adamantine Tower was created by the Aedra to discuss the creation of Mundus. Basically the plane of existence where Nirn exists. Nirn is the planet that Tamriel is on. So this is the building the Aedra built to discuss the creation of what we now know as the Earth of the Elder Scrolls. They also used it later on to decide the fate of Lorkhan, that poor bastard, but the details of this tower are of course unknown. And a fun fact, the other towers around Nirn were modelled off the Adamantine Tower. Even the white gold tower in the Imperial City was built by the Ayleids in the shadow of the Adamantia. Now this tower, despite being so old, has still not fully been explored. Many tunnels and passageways lie beneath it, like the root systems of a great tree. And hey, an unexplored tower built by the Aedra sure sounds like a bedrock for some good adventures. So who knows what's lying down there? In fact, the Adamantine Tower would probably be a keystone in the main story. It's too ancient and has too much magic and mystery surrounding it for it to simply fall by the wayside. So moving to some more familiar ground. The Dwemer. Yes, that's right, the Dwemer actually did have a few footholds in the northern mountains of Wrothgar. Trying to find information about these is almost impossible, long lost and forgotten, but as Wrothgar borders the Druidic Mountains, the same mountains the reach of Skyrim lies in, it makes sense that the Dwemer popped out the other side into Wrothgar. So while in tiny numbers, there are actually some Dwemer ruins to be explored in High Rock. Now, because the Dwemeri influence was not great, there really is no signs of them affecting the area in any notable degree. But fear not, as the Ayleid also inhabited High Rock. This makes High Rock, I do believe, the only province in Tamriel to house both Dwemer ruins and Ayleid ruins, something that will most certainly quench your thirst for ancient and mysterious cultures on Tamriel. I will just clarify that maybe Hammerfell houses both Ayleid and Dwemer ruins, and unlike the Dwemer, the Ayleid had a huge influence on the land, and again, unlike the Dwemer, their cities and ruins can be found all across High Rock. In fact, even the last Ayleid city can be found here in Bangkorai, the city of Bisnenzel. It was founded by the last Ayleid king, King Loloriaran Dainar, after having to flee Nanalata due to the ultimatum made by the Elysian Emperor. So not only do we have Ayleid ruins, but we have the final ruins, the bones of their ultimate cities. The last breath of the great Ayleid civilization lies in High Rock. There are other keynote Ayleid locations like the city of Eroki, once the greatest Ayleid city in the northwest of Tamriel, being home to the Light of Life, or the Latanya in the Ayleid Dune, a relic which helped plants grow and healed illnesses. But following a bloody conflict between the Ayleid settlers and the original inhabitants of High Rock, the relic was tainted and became the Abigandra, the Lightless Remnant, a beacon of death. Eroki's tower became known as the Doom Crag, a spire spewing death and dark magics. While it was eventually destroyed, evil never stays sleeping, and a reactivation or rebuilding of the Doom Crag is something I could definitely see happening in the Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock. There are other noteworthy areas, structures, and so on in regards to the Ayleid Empire that once filled High Rock, but we get the point. The Ayleid shaped the province in one way or another, and there are plenty of exciting new perils and adventures we will be facing in High Rock in the shadow of the Ayleid civilization. Now, before we move on to the two big cultures of High Rock, Bretons and Orcs, we'll touch on the more obscure yet sentient beings in High Rock. By sentient, I mean we could have a conversation with them and potentially receive quests related to these racial groups. So we spoke of most of them just before in the creatures list, but nymphs, for example, they're actually a species of beast folk, the same as the familiar Argonians and Khajiit. They are very rare and very mysterious, but they do have their own language and they are sentient beings. Interacting with nymphs in a non-combat context is entirely plausible, and I'm sure they'll be clothed this time around. Again, mentioned earlier, the Centaurs. While not strictly a species of beast folk, they do have their own language. While they don't exactly have sprawling cities and such, a quest or two would be expected. And finally, the Hags. Given they were once human, just like the Hag Ravens, they are as sentient as any other human or beast folk. While I would imagine they are primarily aggressive combat-based enemies in the game, I would expect there to be, subsets of hags who are neutral and in need of an adventurer for some help, just like you and me. As we learned earlier, geographically, High Rock only borders two other provinces, Hammerfell, home to the Redguards, and Skyrim, home to the Nords, both of which we could expect to see. As there is a stronger Redguard influence the further south into Bangkorai we go, as of course Bangkorai is split in two, the northern half is High Rock and the southern half is Hammerfell, and the border itself, known as the Bangkorai Pass, was actually built by the Bretons to defend High Rock against wild raiders from Hammerfell, a few of which I'm sure occasionally slip through. Also, along the entirety of the Iliac Bay being sited by both High Rock and Hammerfell, we're going to experience firsthand the grittier Redguard influence in Bangkorai. We'll also be expecting Nord Reachmen coming over and down over the reach from Skyrim into Wrothgar and the north of Bangkorai. Just like we see orcs have come across the Jurassic Mountains from High Rock into Skyrim, it would make sense that some Nords did the exact same thing, just going the other way out of Skyrim and into High Rock. There are also so very few ancient Nordic ruins in Wrothgar, and by few I do believe there is one, and it could be Nedic or Nordic. I mean, we're not entirely sure, but visually it rings in memories of Skyrim and the Nords. One other very unlikely race that could pop up is actually the Snow Elves, as the Forgotten Vale lies between Skyrim and High Rock in a kind of grey area that isn't claimed by either province. I think it is very unlikely we'll see them again, but geographically, the same area they can be found in is just as close to High Rock as it is to Skyrim, this unclaimed region. And while we did explore the Forgotten Vale, there is a lot of other unexplored room up here, so whether or not there are more of these ancient Felmen knocking around in the unknown mountains of the north, well, we'll just have to find out. Now let's get to the ocean. Because the majority of High Rock is bordered by the ocean, we could expect to see visitors or even some influences from cultures from the surrounding islands. The most notable and closest would be the coral kingdoms of Thras, home of the Slode. Now, you might not be familiar with the Slode unless you're quite into the lore or play the Elder Scrolls adventure Redguard, so allow me to explain. The Slode are probably the most elusive yet fully flourishing race on Tamriel, meaning they aren't extinct, they have an entire fully functioning civilization in the current day, yet a seldom seen. So seldom in fact that we've only ever seen one in-game, the famous Nagasta, necromancer of Stros Makai. And if you couldn't tell from a name like that, the Slode are dark and mathematically minded creatures. They boast high intelligence, impressive skills in magic, particularly in necromancy and teleportation. Again, though, they are dark creatures and once even created the Thracian Plague and released it upon Tamriel. In response, Tamriel banded together and set an all-flags navy ravaging Thras, exterminating all the Slode they could find. Then, finally, Thras was sunken into the ocean using unknown magics. The Slode and their homeland were destroyed, but the Slode survived, and then Thras rose back from the ocean to its former state, and the Slode civilization carries on to this day. So they are a very powerful people, with their mysterious coral kingdom Thras just south of High Rock. I mean, maybe some island missions or perhaps even seeing some Slode down in the Iliac Bay is a possibility for the Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock, and one that I am personally very excited for. Now there is of course the Mayama, the Sea Elves. While most of High Rock is bordered by just that sea, the Mayama homeland is nowhere near High Rock, and is in fact very far south of Valenwood, even to the southeast of the Somerset Isles. Yeah, as I said, it's really far away from High Rock. So given we haven't seen any Mayama in previous Elder Scrolls games, despite them all having ocean-based borders, I think it's safe to say that we won't see any in the Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock. I mean, there aren't really any reasons not to see them, as how hard is it hopping on a boat and, sailing around? Traditionally, the Mayama have always caused trouble and been in conflict with the more familiar Tamrielic races, so historically, Tamrielic races and Mayama haven't really ever mixed well. That's probably why we don't see them. But I mean, come on, there's gotta be some of them that aren't trouble causers. Anyway, hopefully this tradition of Elder Scrolls games of not seeing the Mayama, despite there being sea borders, will change in the Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock. Finally, for the non-mainstream cultures, we'll touch quickly on the least likely. And by least likely, I mean we're not going to see them. But far west, across the Eltheric Ocean lies the ancient and thought to be destroyed continent of Yakuta, where the Redguards originally came from. Now, what state Yakuta is in, no one knows. Is it completely sunken into the ocean, or are there still people living there? Again, we really just don't know. If we ever do see Yakuta in an Elder Scrolls game, it would be much more likely to see it in the Elder Scrolls Hammerfell, as again, it's where the Redguards originally migrated from, so that would make more sense, culturally. But geographically, Yakuta is actually closer to High Rock. But going there in any Elder Scrolls game ever, I suspect there is a 0.000 continue on forever % chance of that ever happening, but it's worth mentioning just to cover all bases. So there on Yakuta are either ancient Yakutan tribes, who would be more similar to the Redguards in culture and in nature, Or maybe, just maybe, we'll see the Sinistral Mer. The left-handed elves, a very powerful race, but who made the Red Guards hate elves. The hatred between the ancient Yakutans and the Sinistral Mer was so great, it actually resulted in the sinking of the entire continent of Yakuta. So I doubt we'll ever go there, and I doubt we'll ever see any hint of civilization from there in the current day Elder Scrolls. But again, geographically, it's worth mentioning in Red Guards to High Rock. Now let's move on to the Orcs, the Ozma, the pariah folk. This is a strange one, but easily the second biggest modern culture in High Rock. These poor buggers have had a very hard time in High Rock throughout history. The Orcs are considered to be the social outcasts of the Tamrielic races. Due to this, they are very often scorned by the other races. Now the Ozma are actually of elven blood, but many in Tamriel either don't recognize this or have forgotten it. Sadly, the Orcs are often looked down upon as barbarian people hailing from the mountainous regions of the Western Tamriel, and while the mountainous regions of Western Tamriel are partially in Skyrim and partially in Hammerfell, the majority of these mountainous Orcish territories are in High Rock. And despite being a tribal people for many ages, eventually the Orc chieftain Torug Gro Igron founded Orsinium. At first it was merely a small collection of huts, but soon enough more and more Orcs came to Orsinium, making it a rising civilization. Located high in the Wrothgarian mountains, it soon grew to house more permanent structures. As time went on, Orsinium rose and fell, and being built in different locations each time, leaving massive ancient Ozma ruins dotted around the mountains of High Rock. However, the Ozma were very lucky, as an Orcish visionary named Gortwog Gro Nagorm acquired the site of the former civilization of Orsinium and began reconstructing a new city for the Ozma of Tamriel. As it grew, many thought it would fall to the same fate as its previous incarnations. Gortwog, though, proved to be a superb politician and diplomat, managing to make negotiations with Orsinium's neighbours, which saw Orsinium prosper. He also managed to negotiate terms of peace with Uriel Septim VII, resulting in trade, commerce and civil social ties with the other provinces of Tamriel. For the first time, the Orcs were serious political powers among the other races of Tamriel. Now this is where things get interesting. Early in the 4th era, Orsinium was sacked. It's thought this was done by the combined forces of High Rock and Hammerfell, although that is not confirmed. Unlike before, Orsinium was not rebuilt in the Wrothgarian mountains of High Rock, but instead re-established in the Western Reach Mountains in between Skyrim and Hammerfell. Now the Western Reach Mountains are basically the meeting point of High Rock, Hammerfell and Skyrim. So Orsinium could be in any of them, or as stated, in between them, meaning Orsinium could actually not be in High Rock anymore, therefore we wouldn't see it in game. However, even if this is the case, it could have moved back to Hammerfell during the in-game time gap between the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls VI High Rock. For example, there's a 201 year gap between the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion and the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. So if there's another 201 year gap, I mean a lot can happen in that time. And even if it doesn't come back to High Rock, we'll have tons of Orcs who didn't live in Orsinium still in High Rock, and we'll also have the ruins of the previous Orsiniums to explore. Basically, if Orsinium isn't in High Rock anymore, we'll still get one hell of a lot of Orcs in the Elder Scrolls VI High Rock, which would be a good thing, as classically, Orcs are fighters, warriors. They are famed for their strength and power in combat. They often excel as adventurers and legionaries in the Imperial Legion. This is not to say that Orcs cannot wield magic, however, as there are often, while uncommon, they can usually be found within Orcish tribes, wise men, oracles, shamans of a sort wielding almost forgotten nature-based magics. But I must say, their heavy muscular frame and considerable stature makes the Ozma stand out apart amongst mer and men, and their development of a strong warrior culture makes them highly valuable in hand-to-hand combat, which is a really good thing because this means the Ozma culture will somewhat balance out with the Breton culture, which has a much heavier hand in magic. And speaking of, let's now talk about the Breton culture in High Rock. And to understand them, we must understand who the Bretons are and where they came from. So the Bretons are actually the result of Aldmer slave masters breeding with their female Nedic slaves and impregnating them. There is another theory that the Bretons are a result of the Aldmer breeding with Atmorans, but I think the Aldmer/Need theory is better. Regardless, this resulted in a hybrid race, the Bretons, sometimes even referred to as Man-Mer, quite literally translating to man-elf, consequently termed as the mongrel race of Tamriel. While their elven blood is heavily diluted due to their ancestors intermingling with Nordic populations in Skyrim and the Nedic populations in High Rock, although their Aldmeri ancestry is veiled by their human appearance, they still inherit the magical affinity that comes with their elven blood. Their physical features resemble heavily their Nedic ancestors, including their pale skin tones and the obvious physical resemblance to the Imperial/Nords. But there are some bloodlines that still inherit the frail, sharp appearance of the elves, along with their arrogance. And would you believe it, but there are even some families that do actually have slight points in their ears, just like their elven ancestors. Luckily for the Bretons, they have the sharp minds and arcane talents of the elves, yet the friendly and more charming aspects of humans, just like me. Passionate, eccentric, poetic, flamboyant, intellectual, and willful, the Bretons feel an inborn, indistinctive bond with the mercurial forces of magic and the supernatural world. While lacking in physical skill, they make up for it with their inherent ability with all schools of magic. Their sharp minds also lend a great hand into the Breton ability for commerce and their affinity for intellectual tasks and pursuits. The Bretons are united in culture and language, even though they are divided politically, for High Rock is a fractious region. Though their clothes, accents, customs, and names are fairly uniform, the Breton culture of High Rock is actually largely agrarian and hierarchical in society and feudal in nature. Most Breton cities are sprawling trade hubs, and most of the people are either middle-class peasants or destitute beggars, ruled by their complex and many political powers, families, monarchs, and factions. The constant play for power among the various monarchs and rulers of the Iliac Bay region is a deeply ingrained, and you know what, it's even a cherished part of Breton culture. Though most Bretons have several paths to prosperity available to them in High Rock, becoming a nobleman by performing quests and services to gain favour with the various rulers is considered the best way. Because of this, a quest-obsessed culture has been created among the young Bretons. The desire to find fortune and glory has made Bretons venture all over Tamriel, seeking heroism and discovery. I could go on and on, as the Breton culture is very complex, but essentially, the Breton culture is 100% classic European fantasy. Feudal in nature, knights, wizards, banners, houses, heroes, adventurers, beasts, gods, ancient secrets, castles, villages. Think Game of Thrones with more magic, or perhaps the knightly culture of the Blood and Wine DLC from The Witcher 3, or even the Bretonians from Warhammer Fantasy. High Rock is definitely the most classical European fantasy province in Tamriel, yet it's got that sweet Elder Scrolls twist to it, rendering it exciting yet familiar. So now let's talk about the factions and then jump to what the entire crux of the Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock would be. But first, the factions. First, we'll cover the familiar factions. Let's start with, say, the Fighters Guild. While it won't have the strongest presence in High Rock, with only 4 known fighters guilds across the province, and with not many that interested in it, the Fighters Guild is present in High Rock, but not to any substantial degree. However, with more and more Orzammar coming to the big cities, they make perfect candidates for a Fighters Guild member, and bolster the ranks and interest in the faction. Although I do feel that a need for a Fighters Guild is slightly lacking in such an kind of ordered and magically superior province. Nonetheless, it's a staple, and we can definitely expect to see it. Or of course, a substitute. Next, the Thieves Guild. While not noted to be a big part of High Rock culture, nor are the Orcs or the Bretons famous for their thieving abilities or attributes, just think about all the ports and cities with people coming and going from all around Tamriel. Any busy city that boasts great commerce breeds with it an underworld of thieves and vagabonds, and And again, considering most of these business-based cities within High Rock are on the coastline, I mean, there are all kinds of people coming and going in the blink of an eye. Corsairs, pirates, people from strange lands bearing strange items, coming and going day after day, many of which with unknown motives. They're gonna steal some stuff. And we should also keep in mind that with the great number of competing political factions and powers, a few thieves here and there to go and do some dirty work is to be expected, so we'll definitely see a Thieves Guild presence, or of course a substitute for them. The Mages Guild, undoubtedly the most notable and important faction in High Rock, particularly within the Breton culture. With magic being already built into the very genes of the Bretons, the Mages Guild reigns supreme as a superior faction throughout High Rock. Multiple Mages Guild headquarters can be found in High Rock, let alone all of the normal guild halls dotted throughout the province. Even a Mages Guild was established within Orsinium, as some orcs do boast magical understanding, usually leaning more towards the mystical nature-based magics passed down through tribal wisdom, but High Rock's got a really big Mages Guild presence, and given the number of ancient magical sites found throughout High Rock, particularly those of the Ayleid, yes, we will see plenty of adventure, plenty of mystery and intrigue revolving around the Great Order of the Mages Guild. Moving on to everyone's favourite, the Dark Brotherhood. Got some bad news. During the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim, we learned that High Rock's only Dark Brotherhood sanctuary in Wayrest was destroyed. So from a current day lore perspective, the Dark Brotherhood is no more in High Rock. Now let's look at this from Bethesda's marketing point of view. We want to make the fans happy and make heaps of money at the same time. Will we put arguably the most loved faction into the Elder Scrolls VI High Rock despite their only sanctuary being destroyed? Hell yes. Let's put the Dark Brotherhood into the game. And I mean, even if the Wayrest sanctuary is destroyed, which it actually might not be, basically what happened, the city of Wayrest was raided by Corsairs. Therefore, it was only a matter of time until the Dark Brotherhood sanctuary in Wayrest was found and raided as well. So its fate is actually unknown, but it's thought to be destroyed. And again, even if it is destroyed, like most things in the Elder Scrolls, they tend to come back. Maybe they'll make a new sanctuary, who knows? But I mean, come on, we'll see the Dark Brotherhood, and I mean, they're needed, I tell you. Espionage has proven to be one of the strong suits of Bretons, as Breton double agents, assassins, spies, all of these have turned the tides of war throughout recorded history. And with a hugely complex hierarchy of noblemen, businessmen, monarchs, family lines, leaders, political powers, and so on, High Rock sure sounds like the place that needs a few assassins handy to take out competitors in the game of Bretons. So the Dark Brotherhood, tick. I'm pretty certain we'll see it soon, bro. Now, something really cool about High Rock is its revered knightly orders. If you played the Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall, you will be familiar with these classic knightly orders. These are as follows. The Host of the Horn, the Knights of the Dragon, the Knights of the Flame, the Knights of the Hawk, the Knights of the Owl, the Knights of the Rose, the Knights of the Wheel, the Order of the Candle, the Order of the Raven, and the Order of the Scarab. These are basically region-specific minor factions of knights who perform the biddings of the local rulers. While in the Elder Scrolls II Daggerfall, you could only join one of them in any given playthrough, a limitation that I believe is irrelevant, unless it ties into more of a grand house system, which we'll talk about in a minute. But back to the knightly orders, I also just wouldn't mind seeing all of these separate knightly orders being part of a bigger umbrella faction. You know, something simple like the Knightly Order, where you can join it and go city to city and serve the regional masters, rather than being bound to one region. That sounds like a lot of fun, actually. Now, along with the knightly orders, there is a completely different and not to be confused with Templar knightly orders. These are basically the same thing as before, but with a connection to the divines. And just note that the Bretonian pantheon is slightly different to the 8 divines of the Imperials, so you'll hear some new names and miss some familiar names. So we have the Akatosh Chantry and the Order of the Hour. We have the Order of Arkay and the Knights of the Circle. We have the House of Dibella and the Order of the Lily. We have the School of Julianos and the Knights Mentor. We have the Temple of Kinnereth and the Kinaran Order. We have the Benevolence of Mara and the Maran Knights. We have the Temple of Stendar and the Crusaders. And finally we have the Resolution of Zaen and the Knights of Iron. Ugh, it's a lot of little factions to worry about, but again, you could only join one of them in any given playthrough. In the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, again, I think this is irrelevant. I really don't mind seeing these tiny factions rolled into one greater faction like we saw in Morrowind with the Imperial Cult. Instead of a bunch of little cults worshipping each of the divines, we just had the Imperial Cult. It was essentially a faction based around performing deeds, services, and your abilities to tasks associated with the 9 or 8 divines or whatever amount of divines are knocking around. You know, giving to charity, healing ill people, helping poor people, cleansing temples of evils, retrieving ancient holy artifacts. It was actually a really fun faction, and I'm genuinely stunned that we haven't seen the return of the Imperial Cult since Morrowind, but I'm looking forward to their possible return in the classic Imperial Cult form, or in a kind of the Knightly Order or the Templar Cult, something on a similar path but more specific to High Rock. Okay, so as mentioned a minute ago, I'd expect there to be a house system, as High Rock is actually a cluster of independent kingdoms and counties, all of which are ruled under the Cyrodiilic Empire. So there are many kings, queens, castles, duchies, barons, countesses, counts, lords, ladies, and so on. At some points in history, High Rock even had over 400 kings reigning at any given time. There's even a classic Breton saying, find a hill and become the king of it. Mix this with 5,000 years of history and I mean, High Rock's got a real crazy political system. But from this, a healthy biome is created for a selection of separate political factions within High Rock. A great example of how this would work is the house system from the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. You had a bunch of factions, you know, Mages Guild, Fighters Guild, blah blah blah, all that stuff, that you could join in every single playthrough, but then it came to the great houses. Hlalu, Redoran, the Telvanni. You had to choose one, and you could only have an allegiance to one of the 3 during any given playthrough, save for some glitches that we won't get into now. This is essentially a far superior version of Skyrim, in which you could choose between the Imperials or the Stormcloaks in regards to the Civil War. However, unlike Skyrim, the House Redoran quests, the House Hlalu quests, the House Telvanni quests, these quest lines were 100% different from one another, and 100% fit the different styles and ideologies of these unique great houses. So although you had to choose between one of the 3 in a playthrough, this meant that each playthrough was a genuinely different experience and not the same thing but with a different uniform, like with the Imperial Stormcloak thing. So I would love to see the return of this concept, and the same as in Morrowind, helping and finishing one house doesn't entail the destruction of the other houses. How can I put this simply? Let's say you joined the tennis club. You don't have to destroy the baseball club or the swimming club. No, you all do your own thing. While every now and then a tennis ball might fly into your pool, get out of my pool, you bastard. For the most part, you all manage to coexist within the same sports centre. Well, High Rock is that sports centre. And while their political factions and kingdoms might quarrel from time to time, overall, I'd like to see a general peace and understanding between them. With, of course, you know, there's got to be some political subterfuge, like taking out one of their leaders or sabotaging one of their trade routes. But it doesn't have to be psycho, like wiping out entire cities or anything like that. So that, a house system or a political faction system where you choose from one of 3 or so factions per playthrough, each having their own entirely unique questline, leaving some fresh content for new playthroughs. Now, given that there are a number of witch covens in High Rock, I'd love to be able to interact with them and have them as a joinable faction. While we often think of witch covens as evil, they're not always, particularly the Witches of Glenmore are weird in Bangkorai. I mean, in the Elder Scrolls 3 Blood Moons expansion, we met 3 of its members. They had travelled to Solstheim to cure the sufferers of lycanthropy, werewolves. So some of these witches and witch covens actually use their ancient knowledge for good. Usually housed in deep and ancient parts of the wilderness, the famous witch covens of High Rock would be a welcome addition to the factions, even if they are only a minor faction with only a few quests. And speaking of magic and witches and all that, vampires, werewolves, werebears, and wereboars. Once you become one of these things, I would like there to be a minor factions where they're like, hey, now you're one of us, come join the gang, and you do some quests for them. In the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, there was actually 3 different vampire clans you could choose from. I don't really think that's necessary, especially because they're such minor factions. If you just have a vampire clan, once you become a vampire, you have the option of joining them, doing some quests for them. Same goes for the werewolves, the wereboars, and the werebears, or maybe, a single faction for the 3 lycanthropic transformations. And again, they don't have to be massive factions, just, something that's special and unique to those who wish to become lycanthropes or vampires. So, while I do believe that this faction would have a minor role, I'd like to see the return of the East Empire Company as a joinable faction. In fact, if we look at their trade route map, we can see that there are actually 4 stops in High Rock. Seeing East Empire Company warehouses in these ports would be exciting. A faction based around commerce, business, and industry is actually fun, and the East Empire Company would bring exactly that. Building off of the lust for adventure, glory, discovery, and exploration within the population of High Rock, I'd love to see something simple like an Explorers or Adventurers Guild, where it is a hub for people interested in such tasks, with no promise of reward, just a simple, welcome recruit, we heard there's a cave in Riven Spire, no one knows what's in there, but it's our duty to go explore it, let's go. Just simple, silly things like that with no true motive other than adventure. Of course, you'd stumble upon some crazy things in the caves and this would unravel into, broader storylines, but the idea of an Explorers Guild or an Adventurers Guild where these green, young Breton wannabe heroes can test themselves and put themselves to good use. I think the final obvious major faction would be something to do with the Orzammar, and maybe not to do with the Orcs of Orsinium, where they're, more of a modern day culture of Tamriel, but perhaps something to do more with the Orcish clans in Wrothgar far to the north. The more nomadic people, like the Skull village on Solstheim for example, while they are Nords and are technically part of Skyrim, they are completely disconnected for the most part and stand with their own rules and traditions. So I'd love to see this on a grander scale with a faction of Orc clans. This would be a welcome palate cleanser after all of the classic European fantasy we'll experience for the most part throughout High Rock. Thanks to the bloody Bretons, these Orc clans would have wise oracles and obscure and ancient tendencies. It sounds like fun, and again, for me at least, it's definitely a welcome addition to the factions of High Rock. There are only a couple of other minor factions I could imagine really making sense in High Rock, one of which would be another magic-based faction. Of course, we have the Mages Guild, but magic's probably the broadest skill range in the Elder Scrolls, so why is there one magic faction? Especially in High Rock where magic is loved and very common. I would imagine there would be multiple magic factions. And again, given the Mages Guild is such a large part of High Rock's culture, yet it also has rather strict rules that forbid several forms of magic. Well, let's just say there might be some who wish to dabble in them, most players included. Some kind of outcast band of arcane scholars interested in pushing the boundaries of their abilities without the restrictions of the Mages Guild. And finally, maybe some really tiny factions to do with the nymphs or the centaurs, like helping their clans out or whatnot. Nothing major, but something fun. Oh, and there is actually one last one here, the Blades. Could we expect the Blades to be in High Rock? Look, the Blades were exterminated. Yet, we saw them in the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. So with that as our only example of a game set after they were wiped out, yeah, we could expect to see the Blades, and I would imagine they would play some weird role in the main quest line, just like in every other Elder Scrolls game. But overall, really, the more factions the better. There has consistently been less and less factions with, sadly, less and less quests. So throw out that idea, Bethesda, stop downsizing the factions and quest lines, please. bring back heaps of factions and bring back heaps of quests, as High Rock is the place for it. And now we are led to the final topic of the video, the crux of the Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock. Why High Rock? What's the main quest? What's happening? In previous Elder Scrolls titles, there has always been a devastating event, or some form of impending doom looming over the province in which the game is set. For example, the return of Daggerfall, the Oblivion Crisis, the Warp in the West, the return of Alduin the World Eater. All the previous titles have had an event taking place in that particular province. That is why the game was set there. So what's High Rock's event? A question that can only be answered with speculation, or if someone is a farseer and knows, please let me know. So the current state of High Rock is widely unknown. Although we do have various skerricks of information, we really don't know much. What's the latest? Well, Orsinium was sacked and has since moved to an unknown location. The city of Wayrest was sacked by corsairs, pirates essentially. As far as we know, High Rock is still under Imperial rule. Now this leads to an interesting discussion. Depending on what the canon is for who won the Skyrim Civil War, could really turn the tides of what's happening in High Rock, as High Rock is part of the Cyrodiilic Empire. As of course, it's a good move to join with the most powerful force, the Empire. However, if Skyrim won the Civil War, if the Stormcloaks and Ulfric beat the Imperials, that means that the Empire is not only weaker as they've lost Skyrim, but it also means that the Empire was defeated by half of a single province. This makes the Empire a bit less of an impending ally and a bit more of a why am I friends with you? And if that's the case, then High Rock has far less reason to keep its allegiance with the Empire. The Empire also brings with it the Thalmor. Again, no one really wants that. So we could very well see High Rock in open rebellion against the Empire, or maybe they have already left the Empire and rule as an independent province. I mean, we just don't know. 200 years between Oblivion and Skyrim with no information about High Rock, and then whatever game time has passed between Skyrim and the Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock, a lot could happen. But if it's the other way and the Empire won the Skyrim Civil War in canon lore, we could expect to see much more peace, with the entirety of High Rock under an umbrella rule of the Empire, while still sustaining their original High Rockian complexities of internal politics. And you know what? To be honest, I'd much prefer to experience High Rock during a time of civil peace. If some evil power comes back and turns things upside down, that's no problem, but civil war like in Skyrim, I really don't want to see that in High Rock. Or any other province for that matter. I can see, pirates and corsairs, vagabonds coming through Iliac Bay and posing a threat to the trade hubs. I can see the Nord Reachmen coming across the Juradic Mountains and causing a problem in that section of High Rock. I can see the Redguard raids coming across from Hammerfell being a problem. However, none of these are main questline worthy. We need something godly, something extreme, metaphysical, magical, professorial, esoteric, ancient. Specifics, again, we can't say, but let's get our guessing hats on here. I mean, High Rock is home to huge burial grounds, which have proven to be an issue in the past when an elite necromancer gets in there. We could have something to do with the arcane and mysterious alien structures like the Doom Crag reactivating, or the Crypt of Hearts spewing out some foul magic. Some ancient and forgotten soul lich rising, an alien emperor perhaps rising from the dead. There are plenty of cool ways in which something profound and threatening could pop up in High Rock. But I do think that the most likely center for all of this would be the Adamantine Tower, Direni Tower, Tower, the Adamantia. As we spoke of earlier, this is the oldest structure on Tamriel, built by the Aedra, the Divines. The gods themselves built this thing. Not only that, but it's been here for the longest time and still hasn't fully been explored. I mean, what's going on in this tower? There are tunnel systems under it, and no one knows what's down there? That sure sounds like a hotspot for some good old school prophecy type stuff right there. And I do feel like this should be addressed. In case you're wondering, during the Elder Scrolls 2 Daggerfall, again set partially in High Rock, there was an event called the Warp in the West, which was a dragon break. This was caused as a result of someone reactivating the new medium. This warp in the west, or dragon break, led to 6 alternate timelines all taking place at once, which actually meant that whichever ending of the game you chose was canon because all 6 endings actually took place at the same time. Don't you love Elder Scrolls lore? Love it! But of course the looming question is, if this happened in High Rock before, could this happen again? The new medium was subsequently torn out of time during this warp in the west. So it's gone. I mean, the Elder Scrolls lore is pretty crazy, so it could come back, but I mean, that's pretty unlikely. And I also believe that it's very unlikely that Bethesda Game Studios would make the exact same plot for a game set in the exact same place. Copy and paste much? Yeah, I don't think we'll see that. So highly unlikely and highly unexciting if it did happen. So in terms of foreseeable events transpiring in High Rock, that is about it. We really don't have much to go off. In fact, we have almost no information about modern day High Rock, which makes it impossible to accurately deduce what we could expect there as a main storyline in the Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock. Whew, now if you've stuck around this long, well, pat yourself on the back, as I'm pretty sure that is all of the broad strokes I wanted to touch on in regards to High Rock, its history, its modern cultures, geography, creatures, races, and political systems. And current events, which we don't know anything about. And I mean, of course, on top of all of that stuff, we'll get to experience more things like the Breton and Orc cultures and see their weapon and armor styles. Pretty much apply anything I've spoken about in my other Elder Scrolls 6 discussion videos to High Rock and the cultures within it. But if you want to hear about those topics, go and check out the specific videos covering those very subjects. Links can be found in the description. So hopefully by this point you'll agree, the Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock sounds prime. Originally, I was hesitant given it had such a classical European fantasy setting, which the fantasy gaming market is oversaturated with, but despite this, once all of the unique Elder Scrolls elements are thrown in as well, it all mixes together into some delicious baked goods, and I sure as hell want a bite of that pie. I'm not too sure what that analogy was, but I'm sure you'll want a bite of High Rock too. If you do have any relevant information about High Rock that you think will be important in shaping the Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock, be sure to leave a comment with all of your brain candy for everyone to feast upon. I would greatly appreciate it. We also need all of your comments and ideas about High Rock being the setting for the Elder Scrolls 6, as there is of course the Elder Scrolls 6 rediscussion series, where I go through the comment section of each Elder Scrolls 6 discussion video, harvest the best, juiciest ideas from you guys, and then we'll represent them in a video so you guys can have a voice too. And hopefully together we can affect the outcome of the Elder Scrolls 6. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for watching. Be sure to check out my other Elder Scrolls 6 videos down in the description along with my social medias. Leave your comments with your thoughts and theories for the Elder Scrolls 6 High Rock. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I'd greatly appreciate it. And if you're up for it, consider becoming a patron in our modern day of YouTube adpocalypse. So thank you very much for watching. I'll see you shortly in the next video. And more importantly, I'll see you in High Rock.